As always, answering subscribers' questions, that's what we're all about today. So something you guys have been asking for. Windows Bootable RAID. And I think you're going to enjoy this. We're going to walk you through the steps. This is going to be Windows Bootable RAID 0. That's what everybody's been asking about. Hello everybody, welcome to Build or Buy. I'm your host, Gil Boyd. I want to thank you for joining us. I appreciate everybody watching. We've had a chance to do the Windows Bootable RAID on 3 different cards. We've used, let's go overhead. We've done the Windows Bootable RAID on the Asus M.2 16 card, and this is PCI Express 3.0. We've also used the card that comes with the motherboard, and we have a second one here, which is the Gigabyte TRX40 Generation 4 adapter, and this is PCI Express 4.0. And we've also used the GlowTrend Sky card, which is PCI Express 3.0, but it lets us put 4 drives on PCI Express 3.0, 8 lanes, which is pretty cool. I'm going to boot this machine. We're going to take a look at Windows. I'm going to show you Windows that's already working and functional with the RAID. I'm going to show you the results of a speed test to show you what we got. Then we're going to go back and we're going to destroy that RAID and rebuild it. And I'm going to show you the steps 1, 2, 3, different issues you're going to have and places you might have problems. There are some differences on the Intel platform that we will address in another video. This is going to be specifically going down this path with the AMD doing RAID 0, and we'll try not to go down too many rabbit holes. First thing I want to show you is on the Asus M.2 16 card, which is PCI Express 3.0, and this is the version 2 card. And that's the kind of results we got with 4 drives on PCI Express 3.0. Not bad. Now with the magic of video, I'm going to swap the card out and I'll show you the difference we get on PCI Express 4.0. The magic of video, this part you will not see because I will edit it out. So I've got to pull that card that's PCI Express 3 out, and I will show you the other card that's PCI Express 4.0. And I think you'll find this fascinating. So power's off, drained it. I'll go ahead and unplug it just to be safe. We'll pull the card, swap it out. Every step in this process matters, and I want to be very deliberate as we do this. PCI Express 3.0. It's interesting, Sabrent got in touch with us. They wanted to participate, but I'll just say, William, if you get a chance, check your email. You might have put me in the spam folder by accident, and we just happen to have this configured with Sabrent drives. Bang for the buck. Okay, this is the card that's PCI Express 4.0, and this is the one from Gigabyte, the TRX. So that's what we're going to put in. Now, the first thing you want to be aware of, anything you've got in the machine, my suggestion, disconnect. The only thing you should have connected should be your video card and the M.2 card that's got the 4 drives on it. If you've got an M.2 drive here in the boot, you need to remove it. If you've got any SATA drives connected, disconnect them. Anything SATA, disconnect it. Why? If you've ever done RAID and you've ever accidentally formatted a drive, been there, done that. Just keep it simple. The only thing you want to see in that machine are the drives that are on this card. Keep it simple, then that way you plug your other stuff back in and everything is still there. Otherwise, you're going to have an oops, and you're going to be saying, how did I do that? Folks, it happens. I've done it. A lot of you have probably been there, done that. So just keep it simple. So we'll get the card in the machine. Again, we have 2 16-lane slots, 2 8-lane slots. We're going in the first 16-lane slot because our second 16-lane slot has an EVGA RTX 3080 that's 2.2 lanes wide. And we've got another video we're going to do. We're going to talk about this other slot. And if you'll notice also, we have our Thunderbolt card disconnected. You don't want anything because 2 things you're going to have a problem with. One will be the Wi-Fi, which is right about here. Number 2 would be Thunderbolt. Okay, the version of Windows we're going to use that matters is the same one we used when we built the machine. And that's going to be Windows 10 Build 2004. It will work with this. Now, so that we don't have any BSODs, that version or later. As we go forward, if we're building a WRX80 versus the TRX40, depending on the Wi-Fi card that's on that motherboard, and I'm not sure the specs yet, if it's the Intel 200, which is Wi-Fi 6, we'll be good to go. But if it's a newer card, that's the first place, and what you want to do is slipstream. We've got a video up about how to download the Windows 10 Media Creation Tool and get the latest version of Windows Build. We've also got a video up about slipstreaming. Now, for those of you who say, well, what about slipstreaming the drivers for Thunderbolt? I wouldn't do it because there's a process, and we have a video up about that. Number 1, chipset. Number 2, video card drivers. And then number 3, the Thunderbolt 3 drivers. So I'm just saying, keep it simple. All we need to do is get this card installed. We have 4 drives on here. They're Sabrent drives, 2 terabytes each. This is going to be 8 terabyte partition. And it kind of is a wicked thing that'll kind of blow your mind. But I want to bring it up in Windows and show you what we're looking at. Then we're going to destroy it and rebuild it. And we're going to walk through all the steps. So be sure, put this in, have everything else disconnected, be sure and get your Windows 10 Media Creation tool, have Windows 10 on the disk, and the second most important thing is you've got to have the drivers, and I'll show you once I get this in. We'll switch over to that. So this first, get the card installed. I have read some think that there's a lot of heat coming off of these cards. Maybe, maybe not, matter of opinion. We don't have a switch on this Aorus card for the fans. Since the fan can be controlled by the software, that is an option, although I don't care for the Gigabyte software. So you've seen the speed we get with PCI Express 3, we'll see the speed we get with PCI Express 4. And I can do both in the same machine, but I would not combine them into one RAID. I'd keep PCI Express 4 on one RAID, PCI Express 3 on the other RAID, and have two separate RAIDs. Otherwise, if you combine them, they drop down to the lowest common denominator, so just keep it simple. 4 drives, 1 card, 1 RAID array. Okay, cards installed, screwed down. We'll connect power. Y'all know the drill on that. Now we need to turn power on and turn on a computer. Voila. Computer's on. As soon as we hear it post, then we'll go back into the BIOS. Excuse me, we'll go back into Windows, because I want to take you into Windows first and show you what we're dealing with. But I will let you see what's going on the screen as soon as I see it. Now what we're looking at is the BIOS boot up screen, but what I want you to notice and pay particular attention to is the little dial. When that dial comes up, that's going to be important as we reference this a little bit later on. So once we get into Windows, I'll show you the results of the test. Oops, forgot I had my Windows Media installed. That's what I get for swapping out cards all the time. Now while the computer is booting, I will say something about the Windows Media Creation tool. Remember, 32 gigs or less. Everything matters because we have to have FAT32. Then what I'm going to do on this disk, once it's created, I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it drivers. Then I'm going to go to the AMD site for the TRX40 motherboard chipset, and I'm going to see 3 things. We're going to take a look at that. Now what we're looking at is on the Gigabyte site, and I'll put a link up to all this stuff I'm telling you, because you may want to watch this 2 or 3 times to kind of digest this. There's different places where people get hung up, and I want to make sure that this is successful for you. Okay, we're looking at different BIOSes, F4I, F4C, and F3. Some questions came up about trying to create a RAID, so I stepped back through 3 BIOSes all the way back to F3. And then what I did was I upgraded the BIOS, or excuse me, while I was in F3, I created the RAID. And I had some difficulty creating it for the umpteenth time, and I had one problem. I'll show you when this is finished how I solved it. But then once I finally got the RAID created, I then migrated that RAID through 2 BIOS updates. And I then went to the F4C BIOS. The RAID was still there, but the RAID was turned off, so I had to go into BIOS and turn the RAID back on. So in the past, I've always told everybody, be prepared. When you update the BIOS, you may lose your RAID. Well, unless they update the RAID portion of the BIOS, so far from what I've seen, the RAID is intact. So from F3, created the RAID, then I went to F4C, had to turn the RAID back on. The RAID was still intact, RAID was still there. Booted it, it worked. Then I updated the BIOS to F4I. Again, BIOS was turned off. Whenever you update the BIOS, whatever settings you've customized, everything gets thrown back to the default. And I will say, whatever settings you have when you create that RAID, all that needs to be exactly the same. And I'm going to spell that out, and I'll show you what I'm talking about when we get to that point. So, again, to reiterate, everything was turned off in the BIOS. So I turned those settings back on, RAID was still there. So I migrated a RAID through 3 BIOS updates. Everything was still intact. Pretty cool. I like that. I appreciate that. So until they update that part of the BIOS in the firmware, we're good to go. Now what's curious is we've had RAID 0, RAID 1, JBOD, and RAID 1.0. We did not have RAID 5. Since this BIOS update of F4I, we now have RAID 5. So those of you that wanted RAID 5, now you've got it. But we're doing RAID 0 because that's where the questions have been, so that's what we're going to show. If Sabrent comes along later and wants to participate in our tests, William, appreciate it, then we'll redo the test with the 2nd generation drives. We've also got another card down here that does 6 drives, so we'll see what kind of results we get with that. Okay, I hope you guys are ready. We're going to do a RAID, and one of the first important features of RAID is there's 2 settings in the BIOS that we have to turn on. We have to reboot. Then the 3rd option comes up. Because I've already done this stuff, I'll show you what you're looking at. And the first thing I'm going to show you, even before what you need to do, is I'm going to show you the end results of what you're going to see. If you notice that says Windows Boot Manager AMD RAID, that's what you're going to see unless you have your USB thumb drive plugged in with the Windows installation media on it. That's important because this installation media is what you'll see up there. When I reboot, we're going to go back into the BIOS, and I'm going to show you that. So get ready, you're going to need this in a minute. But I want to show you something you're going to see that you won't see right now, but you'll see when we get through with this. So the first thing we have to do, okay, let's get started. Under boot, CSM support, disable. Go to settings, I/O ports, and right here, PCI Express bifurcation. From what I have seen in the previous BIOSes, and this was with the F3, the F4C, and the F4I, whatever RAID you've created and however you've created it, set that manually. Don't let that be automatic. You don't get the automatic setting for bifurcation until you get to the F4I BIOS. Even though PCI Express 4.0 can do this automatically, set this manually. Keep it simple to make sure your RAID's going to work. I will say there's two types of JBOD. There's the JBOD when you install the card, you go to Windows and you format the drives, that's one JBOD. But there's the other kind of JBOD that is in the RAID JBOD that takes those disks and combines them. We may do another video about all that, but as this relates to the Windows Bootable RAID 0, I want to mention that because if you've been through the BIOS updates and you're trying to figure out why your RAID's not working, that could be one of the reasons. Set that to manual bifurcation. Again, the JBOD configuration, which is just a bunch of disks, if you go to Windows and format those 4 drives on automatic, they'll be fine. But if you're going to do JBOD RAID or any kind of RAID on the card, set this manually. That could be one snafu that I think some people are having. Now, PCI Express 3 has to be set manually. PCI Express 4 is supposed to be automatic, but set it manually. I can't say that enough. Back to the BIOS. Okay, that's the first point of contention some people have. Number 2, SATA configuration. Right here where it says NVMe RAID mode, turn that to enabled. At this point, you're going to need to reboot, come back into the BIOS, and when you come back into the BIOS, you're going to have the third option that I'm going to show you. But until you reboot, it won't be there, which means go to settings, and right here, RAID Expert. You need to turn off CSM, but more importantly, the one thing that activates this RAID Expert menu is when you turn on NVMe RAID. Once NVMe RAID is turned on, enabled, reboot the computer, this menu pops up. Now, this is where everything else has to happen. So we're going to go into that. We'll take a look at the existing RAID. I'll show you what's there. We're going to delete it, rebuild it. Okay, RAID Expert. Now is the fun. We're going to look at controller management. And I'm going to show you an existing RAID. And the 3 things that I want you to pay attention to. 1, we have 1 physical controller. We have 4 physical drives. We have 1 RAID array. I'm going to exit this menu and I'm going to take you to the next one where it says rescan disks. And again, you're going to see right here we have 1 RAID array. It's RAID 0, 7.9 terabytes normal. And this says all 4 of those drives are online. Okay, escape that. Now, escape that. We're going to go to RAID array management. Now this is the next point where some people get hung up. When you first put the card in and those 4 drives are on that card, when you call this up, it's going to see 4 drives. It will perceive that as RAID even though it's not. You have to delete what's there before you can create the RAID that you're trying to create. That's why I said in preface, do not have any other M.2 cards on the motherboard because it's too easy to get confused. Anything else, make sure it's all disconnected. Keep it simple. So let's go into array management. Now if we go into array management, and if you'll notice the create array is grayed out, but delete array is available. So I'm going to go into manage array properties, and you're going to take a look and you're going to see we have RAID 0 in its normal status, 7.9 terabytes. I've gone with the default cache size, which is the largest cache for larger files. You can press enter and see your other 3 options. And if you notice, it says read cache and write back cache. I can look at the associated physical disks, of which there are 4. And the reason they say disabled is I would have to enable to look at the properties of each disk. I don't need to do that. I just need to know they're there. They're seen. I'm going to escape. Oh, while we're there, if you'll notice at the top, it says selected array. Array 1, RAID 0, 7.9 terabytes normal. So let's escape, and let's escape that. Now we're going to go delete the array. Now if you notice, it says array 1, RAID 0, 7.9 terabyte normal. What you would see with 4 new drives in the computer would be those 4 drives. You have to select those 4 drives, delete those 4 drives, then you can go back and create the array. I don't know why this stuff's not written down somewhere, but it's kind of dumb that it's not, because it's ought to be spelled out 1, 2, 3. But this is another place where people kind of get hung up. How do I create an array when it says there's an array there? Well, it sees the disks. You got to delete the disks, then you can create. So that's what we're getting ready to do, which means I can't boot Windows once I do this until I reinstall Windows. And I will press enter, I will enable, and now I have the ability, which was the same thing for check all, to delete the array. I will delete the array, and again I press enter to enable, to confirm it, and then I will select yes. Deleting an array may take up to 15 seconds. After selecting yes, please wait for the operation to complete. Now once we do this, it's deleted, the RAID's gone, there's nothing there, I can't boot back into Windows. But now I can go create the RAID array. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to say yes, and now it says there are no arrays found on the system. I'll press the escape menu, and if you'll notice, create array is highlighted, and that's the default where I'm going to. Now this is where the fun part starts, because this part matters, getting those 4 disks in, getting that RAID up, making sure it works. Then we'll go back to what we did previously, take a look at the disks, take a look at the controller, and verify 3 things we're looking at. 1, that we see the RAID card. Number 2, that we see those 4 drives. And number 3, that we see RAID 0. Those 3 things. So let's create the array. Pretty simple. Create, press enter. Now I'm going to select the RAID level. And if you notice, I've got volume, raidable, which means I can do them later. RAID 0, which is what you guys ask about. RAID 1, RAID 5, which has been added with this last BIOS update of BIOS F4i. All these details matter, so I'm trying to be specific, but I don't want to go this way, I want to go this way. And RAID 10. We call it RAID 10, it's not, that's kind of a misnomer. RAID 10 is actually a combination of RAID 1 and RAID 0. But we're doing the RAID by the seat of our pants, which is RAID 0. So we're going to select RAID 0. And if we had selected, let me go back for a second. If we had selected volume, that is the same thing as JBOD. But we're not doing JBOD, we're doing RAID 0. So it says select RAID level, RAID 0. I'll tab down, physical disk, select, press enter, and I've got 4 drives. So what I want to do, instead of selecting them individually, I'll say check all. They now become enabled. Now I need to go down, tab down twice, apply changes. Now if you'll notice, it says at the top, create array, and the grade menu between that says select RAID level, RAID 0. So we have a RAID 0, we have 4 physical disks, and if you notice, it says in megabytes, 7.9, which is nearly 8 terabytes. Shows the cache size, we're going to leave the default, of which there are 3. We're going for the largest. And the read cache and the write cache. Now the one last thing you have to do is you have to create the array. Otherwise, if you don't create the array, you've gone through the process, but you hadn't finished. It's like kind of like sticking the key in the door without turning it. Until you turn it, you can't open the door and go through. So I'm just saying. So let's create the array. Now we can manage. If you notice, create array is still grayed out. Delete array can be enabled, but the default is managed. So we're going to click on manage, and the things we're looking for is number 1, where it says select array. Array 1, RAID 0, 7.9 terabytes. Pretty cool, huh? We'll look at the properties. Array ID number 1, RAID 0. Normal is the status, 7.9 terabytes. Cache size 256 kilobytes. It is not hidden. And we have read and write enabled. Now here we could go look at the physical disks associated. Again, all 4 of them. I can enable one at a time to look at the properties. Don't need to. I'm going to press escape, and I'm going to press escape from here. And what I want to do is go back to manage properties. Yep, still see my RAID 0. So I'll press escape, escape one more time. This time I'll tab to the top, and I want controller management. Press controller management, view controller information. And this is the most important thing you're looking for. Number 1, controller physical disk count. That's the controller. Number 2, total physical disk count 4. And then number 3, the array account. We have 1 RAID array. Let's escape. We'll look at rescan disks, and this will give us the same information. If you'll notice, it says just above array 1, RAID 0, 7.9 terabyte normal, and it shows 4 disks. And it says, if you notice the identification, 010, 110, 210, and 310. We're getting ready to do a straight, simple, out-of-the-box RAID. So all we're doing is verifying the integrity that everything's working, everything's online, everything's going to work. Because we will not see anything on the boot menu until we get finished. The success of our RAID depends upon everything we do right now. That's what I want to verify. So once we've verified the integrity of this, I'll press OK, rescan disks, same information. So I can press escape, escape again. I will go over to boot. Now, that still says at the top, Windows Boot Manager. Again, that's not for this RAID, that's for the past RAID, and you won't see that until we get through configuring. So the next thing we need to do, we need to plug in our Windows Media Creation tool. And here's where I take the step, and I'm going to show you right quick about the drivers, because this is a really, really important step. If you miss this step, then it kind of blows everything. So Windows Media Creation. Okay, we'll have a link up to Windows Media Creation. Be sure you do that. But once you've done that, then what I'm going to suggest is we need to go get the drivers. So we go looking for the AMD TRX40 Designare drivers, and what you'll see when you get to that, and we'll put this link up as well in the description, is Windows 10 64-bit edition. Hit the plus mark. You'll see AMD chipset drivers. That's not what we need. You'll see AMD RAID drivers. We will need those later, but we don't need them now. What you want is the AMD RAID driver for SATA and NVMe RAID. Download that, find where that's at on the drive, and then what I want to do on this disk, we'll plug this into the computer, and I'm going to create, I have a folder for BIOS, that's where I've used updating the BIOSes, but I created a separate folder from the root for driver. And under driver, I've taken this driver and unzipped it. I'm amazed at, I've had some people that did not realize you had to unzip the drive. Okay, we're going to download the driver. Okay, that is a zip file. Now what I'm going to do is I keep my drivers all in one place. Now there's the RAID drivers. So what I want to do is unzip them. If I don't, I can't use them. I've had quite a few people ask, why don't the drivers work? Well, you got to unzip them first. So now that they're unzipped, I'm looking at, there's a README, the RAID Expert User Guide, a Quick Start Guide. I want the drivers under Windows 10, 64-bit. And the drivers I'm going to use are the NVMe CC. Don't worry about the NVMe DID. They're supposed to be the same, but if you want this to work, the NVMe CC. So all I did was I took those drivers, I'm going to copy them, then on my disk under the folder driver, I dropped all those files. x64, NVMe CC, and I've got these three, RC bottom, RC config, and RC RAID. And even though that's listed 1, 2, 3, the order of installation, and this is essential, even though it's 1, 2, 3, it's actually 1, 3, and 2. So remember that, because this step is also another step where a lot of people get hung up. Now, I could have simplified and just put that one set of drivers, but I want to put them all on there so you'll remember and understand how this goes. So the next step, now that those drivers are copied to that disk, I will pull that disk from that computer, put it in this computer, and then we're going to boot it. And when the Windows boots up, we're going to do the install. And when it gets to the point and says, here's how I see the drive, what do you want me to do? That's where we put these drivers we've just downloaded that are on the same disk. Y'all ready? Okay. So those drivers are already present. I've already done that. So I'll close this disk and of course do the old eject, mass storage media. So what I want to do is take it from that computer and I want to put it on this computer. And because I'm through working inside the box, I can take my gloves off for now. I got to tell you, I hope you guys are enjoying this because I think this is a blast. It's pretty wicked once you get this done. Okay, media is installed on the machine we're going to boot. It's ready to go. So that's a 32 gig or less stick. So we have our Windows installation media stick in the computer. We have one folder for drivers and one folder for BIOS. 32 gig or less, FAT32, plenty of room for it. So let's go to the next step. Now the computer we're going to boot, all we have to do is save the BIOS from where we were because we've created a RAID. F10, it shows everything we've done. We deleted a RAID, we recreated a RAID, we selected our RAID, went through all that. So we're going to press F10 and we're going to boot. Now when this reboots, as soon as the screen comes up, I want to go back and show you because it's important to see that little dial. Sometimes I've had it hang on that little dial for whatever reason. When it's hung for more than a minute, I reboot the computer. The first step, this is going to go fine. It's the second and third step sometimes where it gets a little bit annoying. Just you have to be patient with it. But this first step should be pretty straightforward. Okay, I heard the post. We'll go to the BIOS. Here we go. Now we're looking for the little dial and then the Windows installation routine will start. So we've got our Windows installation media. We have our drivers all on the same disk. Windows just doesn't know where those drivers are. And that little dial comes up. That's important to watch for. That means Windows is doing its thing. So we passed the power on self-test from hardware to software. And this part is pretty standard. Next, install now. Now I'm doing this for anybody that's asking on USB 3. Now this is another point sometimes folks get hung up. If you've already activated Windows on your computer, which we have, that key now is on Microsoft Server. We have our network connection, everything plugged in. So while we're going back and forth doing this and getting our drivers with RAID and going the next step, we're going to be kind of trying to compete with Microsoft to get some things done. So don't be surprised whatever happens with the display. But at this point where it's asking for a product key, if you've already done that, don't matter. If you have not activated Windows, don't matter. You can put that back in. But if you don't have a product key and it has not been activated, the one thing you will not be able to do is customize Windows. So I just want to put that out there. So we're going to continue on our path for success. No, I don't have a product key. We're going to pick our version of Windows, be consistent with that, to activate the same version that you had, to install the same version that you activated. So this is Windows 10 Pro. And this is a build from 7/10/2020. So again, to reiterate, this is Windows 10 2004. Next, good old EULA, have to accept it, don't have a choice. Next, here's where you have to make a change. Sometimes people get hung up on this. You have to remember this is OEM install of Windows. This is not a retail copy of Windows, but this works. So what you want to check is custom. We're not upgrading. Custom install Windows Only Advanced. Yeah. Now, see all those drives? That's not what we want. Windows still sees the controller because it's native chipset support. Windows doesn't understand that we have a configured array controller, so we're going to have to tell it. This is the other point where people get hung up. This is where you have to load the driver. Now, if you notice, something I did not do and I did not mention, and I have not until now, I didn't go into the BIOS boot menu with, I believe it's F12. Didn't need to do that. All I had to do, plug in the stick, boot the computer, and here we are. Here's where we load the driver. Windows can't install on drive, blah, 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 doesn't matter. Load the driver. And we are going to browse for the driver. And remember, driver, we have to do this 3 times. So if you want to just copy the files that you need to the system on that folder, you can do it. We're going to NVMe CC, which is the top of the 3. We're going to RC bottom first, and then we're going to say OK. Then we click on Next. And if you notice, it sees that one file. If we were to remove the check mark, it would show several files, all with the same file name. You don't have to do that. We're keeping it simple. It says AMD RAID bottom device. So that's C driver, Windows 10 64, Windows NVMe. Now this is what you want to see is nothing. Absolutely nothing. So next we'll load driver again, browse. We're going to go to almost the same location. Driver, Windows 10 64, NVMe CC, and we're going to do the second driver, which is the third one in the list, RC RAID. OK. We will say next. And we have one more driver we have to install. And this too, now if you'll notice, we see one drive. So that means everything we did in the BIOS is successful because we're seeing this with the correct controller, with the correct drive, with the correct installation of Windows. Pretty simple. But if you miss one thing, I always say, you know, change one thing changes everything. If you miss one step, you're just kind of blown out of the water. So here's where we are, and I think this is kind of cool. So we're going to have success. So now we see our 7.5 terabyte or 7,450 megabyte drive. Unallocated, one more driver to load. Load driver, browse, driver, Windows 10, 64-bit, NVMe CC, RC config. OK, next. And again, we leave hide drivers check mark, and all we want to see is that one INF file, which is an initialization file. Same thing pops up. So we've got all 3, they're set, we're ready to go. Let's go next. Now Windows is going to do its thing. There's nothing really to see from here until we get into Windows, but I'll go ahead and show the process for those that want to see it. And I'll just say right now at this point, we're going to create a user account on the computer. We're not going to create an online account. Now we're on USB 3. Installation's going about as fast as it can. Could we do this from an NVMe drive? You know, anything's possible. Remember, we're doing an install on one machine at a time. If we were doing multiple machines, then we would create an image and we'd be done. But there's no fun in doing that. This is fun. From my perspective, this is also a way to test a machine, because as you're doing this and going through the process individually, it tests the machine to make sure everything is fine. That's what this is all about. Okay, restarting. Computer's going to restart, 10 seconds. It goes through the cycle. If I don't touch it, we're going to let it proceed. And when it comes back, we're looking for that little, as it goes back to the boot. Windows is going to boot. Now, I have not removed the USB thumb drive, which is the Windows install. I don't have to. It's going to bypass, it's going to go to the second. So if I were to reboot this and look at the BIOS, it would show me 2 options and it would have flipped those boot options. I don't need to touch it, but I will need to when I get finished. So right now, hands off. I heard it beep. I much prefer hearing that post. And let's go to the BIOS screen, and we're looking for the little dial. The dial appears. We are now getting ready to go into Windows to finish our installation. And I'll show you the other little goofy things that Microsoft has going on that I'll show you how we deal with them. I do this usually on every build just as a reminder so people don't forget. But as long as we see that dial progressing, we're making progress. There you are. Starting, getting ready, devices, going through the yada yada. And as this process proceeds, the next thing we're going to do, we've got a few questions to answer. Most of what Microsoft wants to do, we are not going to do. A few things they set defaults, I will leave because I can change later. Our goal is to get this up and running as quickly as possible so we can take a look at our RAID, so we can test our RAID. So far what we did was we showed you a working RAID, we showed you how to delete a RAID, and we showed you how to recreate the RAID. And we showed you how to install Windows on that RAID. So this should answer quite a few questions we've had about doing RAID 0. And which one's faster, depending on what you want to do, depends on how you want to run. Whether you want RAID 0, whether you want the other kind of RAIDs. And I'd love to do a video about that. We may later. But the questions have been about RAID 0, so that's what we're sticking with. We're waiting for the computer to come back up. As soon as it boots again, we have to do the post. I got to tell you, that's one thing about the, there we are, heard the post. That's one thing about the TRX40, it's slow to boot. So as we go forward with the WRX80, I expect it's going to be slow to boot as well. We see our dial. Okay, as long as that little dial is spinning, we're in good shape. So I believe that's what, 3 or 4 reboots we've had to do. The first one, of course, was for the BIOS to get those settings. Then the next one was for Windows to do the install. So I believe that was 1 reboot for the BIOS to get to the RAID expert. Then 3 reboots for Windows to get Windows up and running. And folks, let Windows do what it needs to do to get those drivers installed. I have had this hang sometimes, and when it does, I reboot. Now one time, while this process was going, Windows wanted to do the repair process, which is absolutely useless. It's got you in this circle of never-ending nothingness. So just let this finish. It may take a while, but if it doesn't, I power down the machine, bring it up a second time. If it does the same thing and hangs, I do it a third time. But if you get to the third time, Windows is going to try to go through that loop. And then you have to tell it, finish booting this time. And it will. But I've only had it 3 times. But for some reason, it looks like it hangs. Just bear with it. You know, sometimes I wonder if there's a hiccup or whatever in the installation boot process. I don't know. This will work and it will be successful. But while we still have the dial running, I'll show you. You just have to be patient with it. This could take 30 seconds. It might take a minute. But if you get impatient with it, you can hit the power button, come back a second time. If you get real impatient with it and you hit it a third time, you're going to go through that loop. Eventually it will work. In fact, let's do it. Let's see if we can make it. So what I'm going to do is hit the power button and we're going to force it. So that'll turn it off. Now at this point, I'll go ahead and pull the memory out. I'll turn it back on and let's see if we get out of the loop this time. And I'll take you back over to the screen as soon as we see the wheel, the donut, whatever you want to call it. Waiting for the post. Okay, I hear the post. We will go to the BIOS screen, and what we're looking for is that little wheel. We'll see this time if it works. This is the one last place I've seen a hang up. We'll see how long it takes. Now, like I said, if I'm not patient and if I force it the third time, then I go into that loop. But I've never had to go more than 3 times. Ah, here we go. It's coming up. I saw the Gigabyte Ultra Durable logo blink, and if you'll notice, yeah, now we're going. So I only had to do it 1 time this time. So we're proceeding on. Ah, well, you know what they say, patience is a virtue. Lord, give me patience. So we had to push it a little bit. Now we're going to get Windows installed. Everything now is pretty straightforward. We pick the country. We're going to stick with 1 keyboard layout. We're not going to add any layouts. We're going to skip that. We have a few questions here to answer, and it's kind of like the reverse of an idea for some of this stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and show it and finish it. And if it helps, good. Takes a little time, but I think this is relevant for you to see it. Okay, we're going to set this up for personal use. We're going to say next, and now here's where we go, offline account. We are creating an offline account. I've answered that question before. I'll just say, you know, if you violate Microsoft's TOS, they can lock you out of your computer. So we're going to say offline account. I need access to my computer. Limited experience, and here we are now. I'm going to put in a name. Who's going to use the PC? It's going to be me. I'm also not going to put in a password because what good is a password if I can crack it? And if I can hack it, so can somebody else. No password. Just a moment. And now, a lot of this I don't like, but I don't care, so I'm going to accept it. I can always go back and change that later. It doesn't bother me. Now, do I want to add more devices? No. Do I want to let Cortana do things? No. Everything's proceeding as normal as it should. But once we get up in Windows, we're going to take a look at it. We'll run our test. Now, the next step we'll need to do is the drivers that I showed you earlier. We'll look at the second set of drivers, but instead of downloading them on a separate computer and putting them on the thumb drive, we'll download them on this computer. But I got about 3 things I'm going to customize to make it easier for me to use so I can find my way around. 1, I like the icons on the desktop. Number 2, I like it zoomed in so I can see it, so I set it at 150%. And number 3, I don't like doing double clicks, so I set that for single click, so whatever's on the computer will be just like on the web, single click. So I got those 3 changes to make right quick. So once we get up and running, then we'll go to the next step. This might take several minutes. Don't turn off your computer. Absolutely about that. And remember, all we have running, the video card, the RS quad card. We got Windows up now. Fantastic. Okay, a few things I'm going to do. I'm going to change my display so I can see what I'm doing. I'll right click. I will do display settings. I will change that to 150%. Better. Now I will right click personalize, go to themes, and I will say desktop icons. I want to see all those icons because now I'm going to the control panel and I'm going to make another change so that I can see what's going on because I'm going to look at device manager. So double click, category, 4 changes, large icons, and file explorer, and I'm going to go single click so everything is just a lot easier for me to get around. So the first thing I want to do is device manager. Let's take a look at our disk. Disk drive right there, AMD RAID. So let's zoom in on that. That's the first thing I wanted to see. So I've got the AMD RAID. I will go down here now, look at storage controllers, and I'll see 4 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4 for the RAID bottom device, and 1, 2, 3, 4 for the RAID store port controller. Nice. Pretty good progress, so we're successful. So the next thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and test it. And what I might do at this point, since Windows is successfully installed, I got another change I'm going to make, so give me just a second. I don't want to see all that, but I'm going to download my favorite browser because that's the way it is. So bear with me. I will bring up the browser on the taskbar, and I will go pick up Ninite, NITE.com, and I will download my 2 browsers, which will be Chrome, and for the stuff Chrome can't do, Firefox can. And I will say, okay, get your Ninite. That's all I need for now. I will save those under my downloads. Everything right now is still going to that one drive because I don't have my separate download folder set up yet on a separate drive. So I'm going to open that folder, see that. I'm going to run that, and I can close that browser down, say yes to Ninite, and this blows through the EULA. We will install our 2 browsers. So we're going to see 2 icons on the desktop, of which I will then take and put those 2 icons on the taskbar for quick, easy access. Those all will work for me. Normally, all your applications you download, you want to get direct, but I really like the way Ninite works. It makes it easy. I hope Ninite does not ever do like BellaArc Advisor has done. I like BellaArc Advisor, but now when you download the application, you've got to go send them an email, they send you an email, and then they'll send you the link. They don't let you just download it. I'll close that. Let's put both these on the taskbar. I will bring up and let Google Chrome be my default browser. Close it, open it a second time, and it says set as default, so I didn't have to go hunt for it. And now Google Chrome is my default browser. Close it again, bring it up. I'm going to customize it right quick. Downloads, bookmarks, show the bookmark bar, and my indulgence, builder by. I will bookmark that. Congratulations. We're now 7,220 some odd subscribers. Pretty cool. Okay, we're going to go for the AMD TRX40 drivers, and I'm going to create a folder up here for TRX40 drivers. I'll click on that, put in that folder so I've got it, and I'll scroll down Windows 10 64-bit edition. Chipset drivers, RAID installer, and the RAID driver. There is a reason for downloading the chipset drivers, but we need the RAID installer. That will give us the RAID expert utility, which will be on our desktop, so we can look at the RAID array as a RAID array in Windows without having to look at it through the BIOS. But we're still going to do both those things. We've done one. I want to do the other. So I can download this now, but I need to reboot this and let Windows finish with its... Windows is a bit of state of flux right now, so I need to go ahead and reboot. When I come back, then install this. Otherwise, if I install this now, when I reboot Windows, Windows may hang and I have to do some of this other stuff I've shown you, which is kind of annoying. So keep it simple. So I'll download the drivers, which is the RAID installer. You know, we've already downloaded the RAID driver, which was on the disk, but we want the RAID installer. And this is just a simple, straightforward RAID. Once that's downloaded, I'm going to take a look at it in the folder. Yep, there it is. While we're here, let's go ahead and get our application, and we will download Crystal Disk Mark. So again, I'm going to bookmark that. Crystal Disk Mark standard. Close this ad as soon as it'll let us. It's got 3 little dots up there right now. They've changed that. Bingo. Okay. I click to the side of it. Now we're getting the driver. There it is. Crystal Disk Mark. Excuse me, now we're getting the application. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run Crystal Disk Mark. We should be able to run it with what we've got. But I'm going to suggest, since we've been all this monkeying around, let's reboot just to make sure everything's clean and clear. So I'm going to restart Windows. I normally go ahead and do this right away, but sometimes I have an issue when I've done this, so I'm going to clear it this time since we've been doing so much to get Windows installed and make sure Windows comes back up successfully. As soon as I hear it post, we'll go back. This is a fairly simple, straightforward process, but if you miss one thing, it blows everything out. Heard the post. As soon as we see the dial, let's go back to the BIOS screen. We're looking for the dial. There's the dial. And let's see if this hangs this time. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, it didn't hang this time. This time it went right straight into Windows. So that's a smart thing to do, to prevent from having that hang on that first install or reboot Windows before you install these other RAID drivers or before you run any other tests. So that makes that successful. Okay, every little thing matters. All we need to do now is bring up the stuff that we just downloaded, which is under Downloads, Crystal Disk Mark. Now that we've successfully installed Windows and rebooted, let's go ahead and do the RAID software so we can take a look at the RAID and see what we've got. We'll take a look at the details. This pulls down pretty quick and it will want to reboot when it's finished. So we need to do that. I'll close the background screen. When this is done, another screen pops up and it'll indicate 2 items. And that occurs pretty quick. Right there we are. AMD RAID software. Number 1, the AMD RAID compatible driver, and then number 2, the AMD RAID Expert utility. Utility is what we're after, the driver we've got, but we're going to go ahead. The only thing you don't get with this is the other power profile that you get when you download the chipset driver. That other power profile is specific to AMD for a performance machine. So if you want to download it and install it, otherwise if we go to power profile right now, the default is to shut this machine down. And because this is a high performance machine, this thing needs to be live 24/7. The only thing I shut off is the monitor on some machines. Most all of these high performance machines, everything stays on 24/7. If I shut it off, I shut it off. We don't go into power saving mode because you'll get issues with some of the devices that are plugged in. And I'll also say the Aorus M.2 card, it's lit up like a Christmas tree. So everything's working fine. And if the fan's a problem for you, you can install that Aorus software, which I don't recommend. I'm not a fan of the Gigabyte software, but if you want to, so you can control the speed of that fan, that's the way to do that. So let's proceed on with our drivers. Now once this is finished, it's going to want to reboot. We'll reboot. Then after this second reboot, then we'll run our test and see what kind of results we got. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. I did this several times because the last time I did this, like I said, to reiterate, was on the X399. So some things were a little bit different, and that was a non-typical RAID. What we've just done is a typical straight out-of-the-box RAID, RAID 0. That's what you guys were asking for. And now we'll do a restart, and as this comes back up, we've got to go through the boot process. It's important to let those reboots occur because if you don't, you know, you can have some snafus. I mentioned 2 of them. 1 with creating the RAID, 2 also with Windows to doing the final install to get that back up and running. So to eliminate the problems, keep it simple, follow these steps, and you should be successful. But we still got to run the test. So I showed you a little bit more than RAID. We went through the Windows install because it's easy to forget. But this is a blast. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Okay, I heard it post. Let's go to the screen. We should see the dial. There's the dial. And just be patient with it. The only time we wanted to circumvent that dial was the first time with the first reboot. It was almost like that first time it was in a loop. Now it hung up, but it's proceeding. Boom, bingo, we're good. So always remember those reboots. They're crucial and essential. Okay, we have the utility RAID Expert installed. Let's call up RAID Expert. Now if you'll notice, I just clicked on it, and I'm glad I did because I wanted to show you another difference. Windows will tell you, please run the application as administrator. While running this application at your current user privileges, you will not be able to perform destructive commands. You know, that's kind of a good thing because you don't want to destroy your RAID if you're going to keep the RAID. And that's one of the things I like about the BIOS. Every time we got ready to do something with that RAID to change it, we had to verify that we really wanted to do that so we didn't mess something up. So keep it simple. And the other is to view any partition system array information. So what I'm going to do is I'll cancel this and I will right click, run as administrator, and now we have our RAID array. And as we can see, array 1, 4 disks, NVMe, and it shows those are Sabrent Rocket 4.0 2 terabyte drives, 4 of them, first generation. Array 1, RAID 0, 8 terabytes, normal. Now, if you notice this little arrow up here, I'll zoom in on that. If I click on that arrow next to array 1, I can see RAID 0. If I click on it again, I can see the 4 disks. And if I right click, I can do all kinds of things that we're not going to do. But I just want to show you. Next step, let's test. So we're going to close that application out. Now we need to go to our downloads and we are going to install Crystal Disk Mark. Ask for permission. That can also be turned off. So we're going to install it, and once it's installed, got to go through the EULA. Well, that's what I love about it. I wish this was on Ninite, but it's not. So we'll go through the install, And once it's installed, then it's going to ask us if we want to run it, and we're going to say absolutely. So we're going to launch Crystal Disk Mark. Finish. RAID 0, 4 drives. Notice the default, C drive, which is all we've got. We could also select a folder, which is important if you have a volume. Because we have an 8 terabyte drive, we need to have an 8 gigabyte test size. Let's select all and run the test. So we have an 8 terabyte drive with an 8 gigabyte test file. That way we'll flush the cache. And those are some nice results. 4 drives in RAID, RAID 0, 15,650. Wow, 15,879. I'm getting better results this time than I did the first time. I'm not going to change this screen. I want to keep this up so we see this live. Now remember, there's 4 drives, PCI Express 4.0, first generation. So those are 5,000 megabyte drives. So 5, 10, 15. 20 would be our maximum capacity because of overhead and some other throughput issues. We're getting 15. That's pretty good. A bifurcated slot, 16 lanes, 4 lanes per drive. We're getting the speed of a little bit better than 3 drives. I'm stoked. And always remember, your larger drives are usually running faster than your smaller drives because the larger drives have a larger cache, more memory, you're writing to more chips, so you'll get a faster drive. In other words, a 512 gig versus a 2 terabyte, that's usually where you'll see the difference. A 512, 1 terabyte's faster than a 512, and a 2 terabyte's faster than a 1 terabyte. So we've gone through the process of doing a RAID 0, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. If anybody's had any issues, I hope everything we've done and shown you is going to help you to be successful. The only other issue that we had was when we were in the BIOS, I believe it was F3C, was we had to use the Windows RAID utility, RAID Expert, to go in and delete 3 of those drives. And after we deleted 3 of those drives, we were then able to go back to the BIOS and delete the last drive, recreate it, and everything worked. Now, why that snafu, why that hiccup, why that didn't work the first time, but I had to do that, I have no idea. I'm just telling you what I know. And I'll tell you another thing. Historically, typically, when we find a solution to a problem, even though we don't know the answer, which is different, once we find a solution to a problem, we move on. In other words, this is how we solve it, don't know what's causing it, so when we encounter it again, that's how we hit it again. You know, as I always say, I know enough to know I need to know more, but the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. This is temporary knowledge, folks, and even though we have this figured out, I would expect it's going to be a little bit different when we get to WRX80. So right now, 15,934 megabytes on the read, 14,750 megabytes on the write. Like he says, smoking. Now another question came up we're going to answer probably in the next video before we get to the issue with Thunderbolt, which is not a BIOS update but a firmware update. But before we do that, the question came up about, okay, here I've done RAID, I want this test to finish, and say I've got 4 drives. If they're new drives, it's easy to put them into RAID. But what if I have 4 drives and I want to do a low-level format? So in the next video, that's what we're going to address, is low-level format. How do you do that with an NVMe drive? And what's the difference in low-level format versus secure erase? All those questions in the next video. So 15,934 megabytes on the read, 14,750 megabytes on the write. This is wicked. I've done this several times, but it's been a while since I did it on the X399, so I had to do it a few times to remind myself, and everything I've done today is based on user questions. I think you guys are amazing, and I hope you're enjoying this. I've never been a fan of RAID. I don't like RAID. After I originally did RAID well, let's just say a long time ago, I said, okay, been there, done that. And I have been absolutely amazed at the number of questions that come up with RAID. So I'm more impressed with RAID now than this, but this is only one type of RAID. And if the questions come up asking about the different types of RAID, the different levels of RAID, and the difference in hardware, software versus a hybrid RAID, because folks, what we have just done is a hybrid RAID. Okay, the tests are finished. Yes, a hybrid RAID, which is a combination of hardware and software. Hybrid BIOS RAID, that's what we have here. Let's look at these results. Okay, 15,934 megabytes on the read, 14,750 megabytes on the write. Wow, pretty wicked. 4 drives, again, a little bit better speed of about 3 drives, but you know, hey, this is flying by the seat of your pants, and if you want it, you got it, and there it is. What can I say? For those of you that want RAID, we've done RAID. We've shown it on this machine. We've also shown you how to configure it, how to get back from problems, and provided some solutions. And I'm sure if there's anything we left out, you guys be sure and ask, because that's what we're here for, to answer y'all's questions. I think you guys are amazing. I love you guys. I appreciate you watching. So I think y'all know the drill. On to the next video.